Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of It's Murder Up North. I hope you're all doing well during these unprecedented times. I want the podcast to be an escape from current events. However, I do want to send my love to those who have been affected by this pandemic, those who have suffered and lost loved ones. I also want to give a special mention to those who have been overlooked for years, who are now seen as essential workers, those in the hospitals, from the doctors to the cleaners, the shop workers and the lorry drivers who are keeping the stores stocked, and the teachers who are helping care for the children of key workers. It is about time you were recognised. It is just sad that it has taken a global pandemic for it to happen. And thank you to all the amazing people who are volunteering and fundraising. My show discusses the darkest aspects of human nature, and these amazing people are highlighting that there is so much good in the world. Now to my podcast of the week, the Culture Quest podcast. These guys will have you entertained and maybe you too will become a little more cultured. Here is a sneak peek of their show.
24 hours is like 3 weeks.
Wookiees, lasers, Death Star.
So slugs up your butt is bad. Is that what we've gleaned from this?
Hi, we're the Culture Quest podcast. We're on a quest to become more cultured people by discussing a movie, a music album, a book, or anything else really each episode. Check us out, culturequestpodcast.com.
Now, let's head to the episode. An English village is synonymous with peace and tranquility. Little rural idyls where everyone knows each other and life ticks by at a relaxed pace. These picturesque hamlets where children play happily and parents don't fear for their safety. After all, nothing bad could possibly happen in such a quiet and close-knit community. Murders happen in the seedy back streets of big cities, not in the quaint countryside, where there are more cows than people. Sadly, we know that isn't true. Evil can lurk anywhere, in the darkest night or on a bright summer's day. But there is something about village life that lulls a person into a sense of security and makes them believe that bad things don't happen to their community. Such things happen elsewhere. For one community, this illusion was to be shattered in the most brutal manner. The village of Norbury, Endesbury and Littlethorpe are now popular commuter towns, populated mainly by workers from the city of Leicester. Back in the 1980s, they were still close, community-orientated places, where neighbours knew one another and doors would be left unlocked. 15-year-old Lynda Mann lived in the village of Norbury. She was an intelligent young girl with a bubbly personality. On Monday the 21st of November, it was a dark and chilly night. Lynda pulled her coat tight around her as she walked down the dark track and adjusted her red scarf to shield her face from the icy wind. The narrow tree-lined path was unlit, but it was a route that she had taken 100 times before, and at that time of night it was used by dog walkers and people returning home from work. As she approached the exit to the track, which opened out onto Forest Road, the bright street lights began to light her way. She hurried her pace, only for a dark silhouette to block her way. The dark figure moved towards her. The girl's screams echoed in the cold night, but no one came to her rescue. As morning broke over the sleepy village of Norbury, an autumnal mist lingered on the ground as the cyclist headed down the narrow path known as the Black Pad. He was heading to work at the nearby psychiatric hospital when something caught his eye. In a clearing not far off the path laid a girl. Naked from the waist down, she lay in the dew-soaked grass, her skin deathly pale. Cautiously the man approached her and called out for a response, but the girl was motionless. Realizing that she was dead, he stumbled back to his bike and raced off to raise the alarm. On a street called the Coppice, just half a mile away from the footpath, stood a semi-detached house, home to the Mann family. School children passed by the living room window, and from her chair Kath watched them, their shadows drifting across the wall. She yawned as she held her coffee mug. She was restless and hadn't slept all night, obsessed with the constant ticking of the clock, listening and waiting. She had been waiting all night for her daughter, who should have been home from her babysitting job. She should have been home by 8 p.m. Her family had waited. When she still hadn't returned home at 10 o'clock, her mum contacted the police, who did perform a cursory search, but in the darkness of that cold November night, it was a fruitless exercise. So the decision was made to resume the search in the morning. Preoccupied with passing school children, Kath didn't hear the knock at the door. It was only after the third time of knocking that her attention was drawn to the hallway. At the door stood 2 police officers. Kath welcomed them in, eager to get the search for her child going. The officers were sullen, as they asked Kath and her husband to take a seat. At that moment they knew. The police weren't there to talk about the search effort. They were there to inform them that their daughter was dead. Her body had been found at the black pad. As the officers spoke, Kath's mind drifted as her eyes fell upon a photo of her daughter. Lynda Mann was just 15 years old, an attractive and intelligent young girl, filled with dreams of travelling the world and becoming a fashion designer. She loved clothes and makeup and would create her own outfits. On the night of November the 21st, Lynda had gone to babysit for a family in the village. She left wrapped up in her thick winter coat with her bright red scarf and her brown hair combed perfectly into a bob. That was the last time Kath would see her daughter alive. Lynda Mann's lifeless body now lay surrounded by forensics teams and police officers, who were trying to understand what had happened to the deceased victim. Early signs suggested that a brutal sexual assault had occurred, and the teenager had been strangled with her own scarf. As news of the horrific discovery spread amongst the close-knit community, rumours of who the perpetrator was began to circulate. Suspicion fell on the nearby Carlton Hayes Hospital, which treated the mentally ill. Fears spread that a patient had escaped and committed the brutal murder of an innocent 15-year-old girl. Early on, the police believed that a local resident was responsible. Perhaps it was easier for the community to blame a psychiatric patient than it was to think that it could be someone they see every day, down at the shop or in the pub, or they work alongside. Police struggled to find any leads despite the media attention. There were no witnesses, no one recalled seeing Lynda that night. The only information they had was the semen left on the body, which allowed them to identify the killer's blood type. But this proved useless in identifying the perpetrator, and so the investigation stalled. The villages of Endersby, Norborough and Littlethorpe continued living in fear that the killer was still at large. The story disappeared from the newspapers, but it didn't leave the minds of those who lived in these villages that didn't seem as safe as they used to be. Front doors were now kept locked, children had to stay inside, and teenagers were not allowed to walk about in the village alone after dark. I am sure the residents' fears were magnified by the knowledge that there had been 3 other murders in the Leicester area within the last 5 months. The nervous atmosphere still clung in the air 3 years later, on a beautiful summer's day in 1986. There had been light intermittent showers, but it was warm and pleasant. 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth had finished work at a local newsagent's and had planned to spend the afternoon with her friend in Narborough. But her plans changed and she was going to have to babysit her brother instead. In a time before every house had telephones, Dawn decided to walk to Sharon's house to let her know. She had set off from her home on Mill Lane at 4:15. Along the way she stopped to chat to Tony and Leslie, who were friends from school. Birds sang as Dawn Ashworth made her way along the footpath, known as £10 Lane. It was a track that connected the village of Endersby, where Dawn lived, to the village of Narborough. It was a 20-minute walk between the villages, and bathed in summer sunshine, the teenager was enjoying the picturesque setting, daydreaming about her family holiday to Norfolk in a couple of days' time. She planned to use her wages to buy art supplies. Dawn loved to draw and paint and planned to spend her holiday practising her hobby. £10 Lane was paved at the Endersby village end. However, as it ran between a golf course and the M1 motorway, near to the Narborough side, it became a dirt track with overgrown shoulder-length foliage on either side. It was a well-used route between the villages, and on the way she was seen by a number of people out enjoying the sunshine. The pathway led out onto a busy dual carriageway, and Dawn was seen crossing the road towards the village. Sharon's house was on Calton Avenue, which ran parallel with the dual carriageway, and was just a couple of minutes' walk away from £10 Lane. When she arrived at her friend's house, she was advised that Sharon wasn't there. But her mum told Dawn where she might find her. After visiting the other places and being unable to locate Sharon, Dawn decided to head home, so she could be home at 7 p.m. as promised. There were two possible routes that Dawn could take. She could either head back up £10 Lane from the dual carriageway, or she could walk along the dual carriageway and cross the motorway bridge, which would have taken longer, but she would have been seen by more passers-by. Dawn was a sensible young lady and mature for her age. She would never have used the shortcut up £10 Lane if it had been dark. She would have walked down the dual carriageway, but it was such a bright and beautiful summer's day, and she had seen people on the track. Two people saw Dawn heading towards the entrance to £10 Lane at about 20 to 5. At 5 p.m. on the opposite side of the motorway to £10 Lane, two men who were working at the radiator works heard a loud scream coming from the direction of the track. But it was the school holidays, and they'd heard kids playing and shouting all day, so thought nothing of it. Shortly after the scream was heard, a man ran from the lane and narrowly avoided being struck by two cars, which had to stop abruptly. Both drivers described the man as being in his late teens, early 20s, approximately 5'10", and he was clearly athletic as he climbed the steep motorway embankment with ease and crossed 6 lanes of the fast-moving motorway. When Dawn didn't arrive home at 7 p.m, her parents went out looking for her. They retraced her steps down £10 Lane, but saw no sign of her. And when they stopped at Sharon's house and her friend's mum told them that Dawn had been, when she learned that Sharon wasn't home, Dawn had headed back towards the track. Just like with Lynda 3 years earlier, this was not like Dawn. She was a responsible and trustworthy child, who wouldn't have gone anywhere without letting her parents know. And she would always be home at the time she had promised. Fearing for their daughter, Dawn's parents reported her missing on the 31st of July 1986. An extensive search began of the surrounding area. Police officers walked shoulder to shoulder across farmland and retraced Dawn's journey. The media instantly took up the story of the missing teenager, and the communities hoped that Dawn Ashworth would be found safe and well. Sadly, that would not be the case. as on the 2nd of August 1986, hidden beneath vegetation in a field beside the footpath, lay the body of Dawn. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled. It wasn't long before comparisons were drawn between this murder and that of Lynda Mann 3 years earlier. Both girls had been raped and strangled, and their bodies had been left roughly 500 metres apart. On the 8th of August, the police arrested a local boy. He was 17-year-old Richard Buckland, who lived in the village of Narborough and knew Dawn. He worked in the kitchens at Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital, and would have been familiar with the areas in which both Lynda Mann and Dawn Ashworth were found. He'd been talking about Dawn's murder, and this brought him to the attention of the police, as he knew details that only the killer or a member of the investigation would know. So he was brought in for questioning. During the interview, he admitted to the murder of Dawn Ashworth, but then he would retract his confession. He repeated this act of confessing, then withdrawing his statement throughout the interview. Richard Buckland was charged with Dawn Ashworth's murder on the 10th of August, and although he denied any knowledge of it, he was also charged with the murder of Lynda Mann, as police believed both crimes were committed by the same perpetrator, and that Richard was lying about his involvement. Police needed to prove that they had apprehended the right man, though all they had to go off was a semen sample and the killer's blood type. However, the lead investigator had read a newspaper article about the work of geneticist Alec Jeffreys, who happened to work in nearby Leicester University, and had been studying how illnesses are passed on through families. When during a failed experiment he discovered something that would change the world of forensic science. He discovered DNA fingerprinting. However, when he first suggested that this new technique could be used to identify criminals, his idea was mocked. Apparently, the audience at his lecture openly laughed at the suggestion. However, Leicester police, who were eager to ensure they could put Lynda and Dawn's killers behind bars, decided to give this revolutionary technique a chance. Alec Jeffreys conducted the tests, comparing a sample of Richard Buckland's DNA with samples from the two girls' bodies. His report back to the police confirmed that the same individual had sexually assaulted both girls. However, the man they had charged for the murders was not responsible. So the police were forced to release Richard Buckland, making him the first man to be exonerated through DNA fingerprinting. Undeterred by this setback, the investigators realised that if the process could identify the innocent, they could also use it to find the guilty. To do this, they would undertake an unprecedented operation of collecting blood samples from every man who had reason to be in the area at the time of the murders. And they focused their attention on those born between 1953 and 1970. The template for this operation had been established nearly 50 years earlier, when Blackburn police conducted the first mass fingerprinting exercise to apprehend the man responsible for raping and murdering 3-year-old Junan Debonair. Their work laid out the blueprint for how police should conduct an operation involving the mass collection of information. Testing stations were set up and letters were issued to anyone who met the criteria. The correspondents advised that the individual should voluntarily attend to their nearest centre with a form of identification and provide a blood sample. Whilst this painstaking process was being conducted, a reconstruction of Dawn's last known movements was shown on the December 1986 episode of BBC's Crime Watch UK, in the hope that it would generate new leads. But nothing came from the appeal. Over 4,000 blood samples were taken, yet they still had not gotten any nearer to finding the perpetrator. The months passed by and hopes of catching the killer started to fade. That was until August 1987, While drinking at a local pub, a woman overheard a conversation between some workers from Hampshire's bakery. They were discussing a co-worker who had a thing for the ladies and whose behaviour had unsettled a couple of female colleagues. The woman heard that one man had been to give a blood sample on behalf of this co-worker. This information was fed back to the police, and records of those who had submitted blood were checked. The man the patrons of the pub were discussing was a 27-year-old father of two called Colin Pitchfork, who, according to the records, had been ruled out as a suspect. The man who claimed to have taken the blood test on Colin's behalf was called Ian Kelly, and as soon as he was seated in the interview room, he began to talk. He admitted that Colin had approached him in January 1987. Ian was told that Colin couldn't take the test because he had already given blood for a friend who had a criminal record for indecent exposure. After much persuasion, Ian Kelly agreed to help Colin. He told detectives that, accompanied by Colin, he went to a photo booth and Kelly used the photo to alter his own passport, replacing his image with Kelly's. Colin then drove Ian Kelly to the test centre and waited for him outside. The plan worked, and as Kelly did not meet the testing criteria, no suspicion fell on him, because he would not have been tested anyway. Police arrived at Hayborn Avenue and the home of Colin Pitchfork. As he was arrested, his wife Carol demanded to know what was going on. Colin asked for a moment with his wife, and when she asked him if he had killed Lynda and Dawn, he looked her in the eyes and replied, "Yes, I did." A blood sample was taken from Colin, and as they awaited the results, he confessed to the murders. Colin told them in detail what had happened to the two girls, starting with Lynda Mann on Monday the 21st of November 1983. He told police that he had been questioned shortly after the murder, and had told investigators that his wife Carol had been to the gym on that Monday evening, leaving him to look after the baby. Colin had been telling the truth. He had been looking after their son, who was sat in the back seat of the car when he parked up near the entrance of the black pad. His plan was to expose himself to Lynda, so as he approached her he began to undo his trousers, but the teenager took fright and fled. He chased after her and dragged her into the field adjacent to the footpath. There he raped her. Lynda, although terrified, asked her attacker what his wife would think. She had seen his wedding ring. Pitchfork claimed that he panicked. He thought the girl would be able to identify him, so he strangled her with the first thing he saw, Lynda's red scarf. Colin then returned to the car, where his son was still sleeping, and drove away. In the 3 years following the murder, Colin and his family moved to Hayborn Avenue in Littlethorpe, just a 4-minute drive away from where he had left Lynda's body. In 1986, they welcomed their second son, and on the 31st of July, as he saw Dawn Ashworth, he followed her and exposed himself. Just like Lynda, Dawn fled. She was pursued into a field, and as she screamed, Colin covered her mouth and forced her down into the long grass, where his assault was hidden from the path. After the rape, he once again feared the girl would recognise him in the close-knit community, and as she fought for her life, he strangled her. He then fled back down 10 Pound Lane, across the dual carriageway and up the motorway embankment. When he arrived home, he showered and changed, before heading to the kitchen to bake a cake. When asked why he had attacked Dawn, he told police it was because she was there. Colin was probably correct in his belief that Lynda and Dawn may have recognised him. He had a side job creating cakes for birthdays and other special occasions, and at the time of Lynda's murder, he and Carol had started looking for a house in the area. It came to light following his arrest that Pitchfork had a previous conviction for indecent exposure, for which he was sent to Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital for treatment. One aspect of Colin's background unnerved me. When he met his wife Carol, he was working as a volunteer at a children's home. The thought of him working closely with vulnerable children is alarming. I must add that to my knowledge, there is no evidence of any misconduct while he was there. I also find it interesting that the murders occurred around the time his sons were born. Could this have been a potential trigger? It is amazing what a difference a small detail can make to a case. I do wonder if Ian Kelly would have ever come forward on his own accord. It is a scary thought to think that without him talking in a pub, the murders of two beautiful girls could have gone unsolved. Colin Pitchfork was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 30 years. A psychiatric report that recorded a personality disorder of psychopathic type accompanied by serious psychosexual pathology. He has apparently been a model inmate and has shown signs of self-improvement, including achieving a degree. In 2018, he appeared before the parole board, who denied his request to be released, but did authorise his move to an open prison, which allows him more freedoms, including day release. He is, however, banned from returning to the Leicester area and is not allowed to contact his victim's family. This is probably cold comfort to the family of Dawn and Lynda. Ian Kelly was charged with perverting the course of justice, but due to time served, he received no prison time. It transpired that Richard Buckland, the 17-year-old boy who falsely confessed to killing Dawn Ashworth, had learning difficulties. There has been speculation about why he confessed. Was it out of fear? Was it police coercion? Or had he seen what had happened to Dawn, but was unable to process it? I am just thankful that DNA fingerprinting was able to prove him innocent. Dawn and Lynda had attended the Lutterworth Grammar School. They had ambitions and career goals. They were beautiful and bubbly girls, whose dreams were ended, their hopes destroyed, and those who knew them having to go through life with a piece of their hearts missing. As heartbreaking as these murders were, it is comforting to know that it led to a major change in how perpetrators are identified. Although that will never bring back Dawn Ashworth and Lynda Mann, it has helped thousands of families around the world get closure. As I said, it started 50 years earlier with the horrific rape and murder of toddler June Ann Devaney, who was kidnapped from a hospital ward and brutally murdered. The culprit, Peter Griffiths, was caught thanks to an unprecedented operation in which the fingerprints of every male resident who either lived or had reason to be in Blackburn at the time of the horrific crime were taken. Considering that this was in a time before computers, it was a huge undertaking, but it did lead to the killer being apprehended. I feel ashamed to say that although I was born at the hospital in Blackburn, I did not know about this groundbreaking case. If you want to learn more, I have created a video which is available to view on my YouTube channel. These cases show that we are constantly improving how we apprehend those who commit crimes. And I'm excited for the latest advances in DNA, in which genetic matches are being made using familial DNA. Its biggest success story so far is the apprehension of the Golden State Killer. It's hard to believe that the murders of 2 teenage girls in a tiny village in England could have such a seismic impact on criminal investigations. I mentioned in the episode that there were other murders that occurred at the time of Lynda Mann's death, and I plan to cover these cases in future episodes. Finally, I do want to thank everyone who has shown their support by joining Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Your support is always appreciated. You can also show your support on Patreon for just $1 and get a special mention on a future episode. Episode 18 will be available on Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.